Welcome. Today I want to talk about inflation, and so we're going to get to it right now. Inflation is one of the most important problems we're facing in the American economy today. So I want to talk a bit about what causes it and the different impact that it may have. Let's look at what we're going to cover. So we're going to first talk about what is inflation, how it's different from when regular prices go up, because inflation is the average of all prices. We'll take a look at the different causes of inflation and the different kinds of inflation. We'll look at the impact of it on individuals and on businesses and the overall economy. And lastly, we're going to compare prices over time. Now, inflation occurs when the average of all prices rise. And we're talking here, I'm going to get this straight. It's the average of all prices go up. We've been facing with it drastically this year. In fact, prices have risen the most they have in 40 years. Prices in February 22, last month we have data for, rose 7.9%. That is dramatic. If we look at a graph of inflation in the last 60 years, we see prices going up, a little down, down, up, down, up, down. So just up and down like with the business cycle. Since the year 2000, though, prices have been pretty stable. They've been under 5%. We consider 3% a good number for inflation. In fact, one year in 2008-9, prices actually declined. They were less one year than they were the previous year. Since then, it's been up and down, but still a pretty low level until the pandemic hit. With the pandemic, prices started rising dramatically, especially after we pulled out of that. So that's what we want to talk about today. Why has it gone up so much in the last couple of years? Now, we need to differentiate between the increase on the price of one item and the increase in the average of all prices. We spent a lot of time talking in supply and demand in chapter 3 about the price increase for an individual product or service are caused by changes in supply or demand. But now we're talking about changes in the average price level. So we need to look at the changes in the total or aggregate demand, abbreviated AD, and the total or aggregate supply, abbreviated AS. So this is different than the individual product or service. Now we're looking at the total or aggregate. The graphs are similar for each of these, but the causes of the shifts are different. So let's start out with a little review of how price changes for individual products are caused. And then we'll look at how changes in AS or AD can cause overall prices to rise. Okay, so here let's start with demand curve. This is a traditional demand curve for an individual good or service. And demand, remember, represents what willers or what buyers are willing and able to buy. And you see this curve now, it's going down from the left down to the right. Any curve that goes down from the left down to the right means as one variable increases, the other decreases. For demand, what this represents, as prices go down, prices are going down now, buyers will offer to buy more of the good, all other things being equal. So we're keeping everything which affects buying frozen. All we're varying is the price of the good, and we'll see now the quantity demanded will go up. This gives you this particular shape downward. The reverse is true. As the price goes up, now the quantity demanded goes down, all other things being equal. Supply is the opposite of that. You see the curve now is going upward from the left up to the right. And this is a positive relationship. So as one variable, such as price, gets bigger, the other variable gets bigger. Supply represents what sellers are willing and able to supply. As price goes up, sellers are now willing to sell more of the good, all other things being equal. So the price of other products remaining the same, but as price goes up, sellers move more resources into this particular item so they can make more money. As price goes down, then sellers are less willing to offer as much as before. We put these two together and we get the famous X in economics. So here we have the demand curve going down, supply curve going up. You see they meet right here. The price and quantity will determine where they meet. Recall, this is called the equilibrium point. So the equilibrium point will tell us the price and the quantity being sold. Now, it will stay here until still the demand changes or the supply changes, or both. So here's the two things that can cause prices to go up for an individual product. First is an increase in demand. So demand would increase, this whole curve shifts. This means that every single price level, buyers are willing and able to buy more. What could cause that? Several things. One is an increase in income. As people have more money to spend, they're likely to spend more money at every single price level. So they'll buy more. Second, a change in the price of other goods. As gasoline goes up, people cannot afford to buy as much cars. If the price of gasoline goes way down, people will buy more cars than they used to. Third, a change in taste. If they suddenly developed a cream that you could put on your face and suddenly you look 20 years younger, oh, you'd make a fortune on that. Fourth, a change in expectations. If people expect prices to go up, then they're going to buy more. This is the whole theory behind a sale. The stores have a sale and they say, as of Monday, the sale ends. Then prices will go up. So they encourage you to buy now rather than waiting till Tuesday. So if you expect prices to go up, you buy now. The second thing can cause an increase in the price of an individual good is a decrease in supply. So in a decrease for supply, the supply curve goes to the left. So this would indicate now a higher price and less quantity. Decreases in supplies are almost always caused by an increase in production cost. Okay, now let's go over and look what causes inflation, which is the average of all prices to rise. Remember, now we're talking about the total economy. So here we have a graph of the aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So this is all the buyers and all the sellers put together. Now, the curves look the same. The aggregate supply curve goes up from left up to the right, and the aggregate demand goes down from the left down to the right. There's a few differences here. Now, notice the axes. Before we just had price on the vertical axis. Now we're looking at the average price level. Second, we have the output over here, our GDP. And the curves look at, as I mentioned, the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Inflation occurs when one of these two curves move, when demand goes to the right or increases, or when supply goes to the left or decreases. just like with the supply and demand for individual products. Let's look at this now in terms of the three basic causes of inflation. First is what's called demand pull inflation. And this is when the demand for goods and services exceeds production capacity. Second is cost push inflation. And this is when production costs increase prices. And lastly, we have built-in inflation. And this is when prices now and wages increases are built into the system. So when workers see higher prices, they demand higher wages, manufacturers raise prices, and so forth. Let's take apart each one of these and look at it in terms of supply and demand graph. Let's first start with demand pull inflation. And remember now, this is when aggregate demand increases. Okay, so before we do that, we need to look at what makes up aggregate demand. This is the total spending by the four different sectors of the economy. If you recall from the chapter on GDP, there's four separate components to the economy, or sectors. The first and the largest is called household spending. So household spending is the letter C for consumption. Second is business spending, which is investment, or the letter I. Third is government spending, which is the letter G. And the last one is net foreign spending, which is exports minus imports, or X minus M. So these four components now make up aggregate demand. By the way, let's go back to the GDP chapter. GDP is equal to the total of all of these different components. It's consumption plus business investment plus government spending plus the net foreign. That's why we label it over here on this graph output, which is GDP. So demand pull occurs when one of these four sectors increases beyond sellers' ability to supply. In this case, the whole curve goes to the right, and we see an increase in quantity being sold and increase in the overall average price level. So demand is pulling it now, pulling the overall prices up. So what's happened lately to demand to cause such rapid inflation in the United States? First, it's a rapidly growing economy. For several years, we faced a rapidly growing economy. And when an economy grows, people's outlook changes. They tend to spend a larger percent of their income and saving less. So as they spend more, now demand increases, prices go up. And our economy, we must recall, has been growing at a phenomenal rate in the past couple of years, called the Biden boom by some people. Republicans don't refer to that as much, but the economy has grown tremendously in the last couple of years. Second is pent-up demand. Now, during the pandemic, people could not spend money on a lot of things, so they saved more. There wasn't items to buy. They couldn't go out to restaurants. They couldn't go to movies. They couldn't buy stuff in the stores. So they had a lot of demand, a lot of stuff they needed, plus a lot of things they just wanted to get. As the pandemic wound down, consumers started spending a lot more on all kinds of goods and services. The third is the expectation of inflation. As prices started to rise, people expected inflation to rise. When this occurred, they bought now rather than waited. And the more people do this, the more prices rise. So people expect prices to rise, they act on it, and it causes prices to rise. This causes more people to buy now. This is a vicious cycle. And this is really important. You have to get people's expectations that prices are not going to go up in the future. Fourth, a rapid increase in government spending. During COVID, the government spent enormous amounts of money to keep the economy going. They were giving money to people on unemployment. They were giving money just to families. They were giving money to businesses. And lastly, there was too much money in circulation. When interest rates are low, consumers and businesses tend to borrow more. Interest rates have been historically low for the past 10 years. We'll be dealing this a lot more when we talk in our last module about banking and the Federal Reserve. So these 5 situations all together caused aggregate demand to go way up in the past year, causing inflation. Now, the second type of inflation also happened, and this is called cost push inflation. And this happens when aggregate supply decreases. So this occurs when the cost of doing business goes up, and then sellers in turn pass these costs on to consumers, which raises average prices. So in this case, the curve goes to the left and prices go up and the quantity goes down. So both of these things have been going on at the same time to drive prices even higher. The third kind of inflation is built in. And let's go back first and deal with why did aggregate supply increase recently? Number one, this is a giant one, supply chain problems. Now, the supply chain refers to all the steps of getting a product to the consumer, going from the raw materials, digging out of the ground or wherever they get it, to a supplier who assembles these things and then ships them to the factory. They produce the good, and then they go to a distributor who takes the good and then delivers it to retail, and retail then sells it to the consumer. So all of these steps refer to the supply chain. During the pandemic, we saw a reduction in all of these. Retail stores stopped ordering things from refrigerators to clothing items. Trucking companies reduced the amount of trucks they had. They laid off workers. Factories cut way back. Suppliers did the same. The raw material producers cut back. All of these things reduce the supply chain. And it's taking a while to get it going back up. Second, there's been a rise in wages. Wages grew 4.5% in 2021. That's the largest increase in 20 years. Again, businesses try to pass this increase onto consumers whenever they can. Lastly, the rise in the price of oil. Now, oil is used in the production of most goods and for gas and diesel to ship products. It's also used as a source of plastics. In the past year, oil has increased 70%. So let me summarize. There's been an increase in demand and a reduction in aggregate supply. Now, this is building in to our overall economy. So now we have what's called the third type inflation, built-in inflation. And this is when workers expect their salaries or wages to increase as the prices of goods and services increase. And this creates a big cycle again. Workers demand higher pay, the cost of production increases, which raises the cost of living. So workers demand higher pay and blah, blah, blah. It just keeps on going up. So these are the three types. Demand pull, when aggregate demand goes up. Cost push, when the cost of production increases, leading to a reduction in aggregate supply. And third, when now we have it built into the system itself. Okay, so how do we measure this? How do we come up with the average of price level so we can say it's gone up or down over 1 year? Well, the most common figure is used by what's called the Consumer Price Index. There are other measures, but this is the most one. If you hear inflation's gone up 7%, like I said at the beginning, that's measuring using the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI measures the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for market basket of goods. Now, market basket just means the kinds of things people spend their money on. So it's an assortment of the kinds of things. They actually go shopping and look at the price of Kellogg's Corn Flakes, or a banana, or a pair of shoes, or a new car, or rent, or the price of gasoline, or the trip to a dentist, by urban consumers. They don't count in rural because they have pretty much a different kind of price structure than people who live in urban areas. So then we measure the average price of the current year against the average price in a year we're comparing it to. We call that the base year. So once we get the average price here, we look at now another year and see if it's gone up or down. Now, as I mentioned, the CPI is made up of a bunch of different kinds of things. The biggest component is housing, which is 42% of all the overall prices. So we weight the prices to indicate how important they are in the consumer's budget. Food and beverage is 15% of the goods they use. Recreation, going to the movies or a ball game, is measured by 5% of the total. Medical care, almost 8%, and so forth. If we look at the last 12 months, we look at all items have gone up here, but individual items, oops, go back, have gone up at different kind of rates. But look at the highest rated ones here. Fuel oil, gasoline gone way up. New cars. Here's a crazy one. Used cars and trucks has skyrocketed 40% in the last year. So now all prices don't go at the same rate, but here we're taking the average increase of all of these weighted to come up with the increase in price of the market basket. We measure this now to get the index. We take the price of current market basket minus the price of last year's basket. And that's divided by the price of last year's basket times 100. And that'll give you the consumer price index. Now, we give a difficult time comparing prices in different years. Let's imagine a situation here. We want to compare something that we measured with another thing. We're using the same measurement in a different year. This creates some problems. Let's say you measure your height, and today you measure your height and it comes in at 5 feet 6 inches. That's how tall you are. Well, the 5 feet 6 inches mean today 1 foot equals 12 inches. Okay. But let's say next week the government comes in for some reason and passes a new law saying 1 foot equals 6 inches. Now we have a different standard. Instead of 12 inches, 1 foot is 6 inches. So you go and measure yourself. Now you're going to be 11 feet tall, but you haven't grown, which changes how we measure the standard we're using here. So if we want to compare things, we have to make sure that we're standardizing the measurement units. We got to make it sure it's standard. By the way, the government's very careful about this. They have in Washington, D.C., a rod, which is exactly 12 inches long. And it's kept under a container so it doesn't change. And everything in America that's measured in length is against that 1 foot, which is divided into 12 parts. Same is true of a pound. We have a perfect pound and so forth. Now, this is particularly important when we're looking at dollars, comparing one year to another. So if we want to compare dollars, we have to standardize the value of the dollar. Now, the value of a dollar is what it can buy. So we say the value is stated in prices. And the price in one period, we use a term called the nominal value. But as prices change, the value of the dollar changes. So if we want to compare prices in 1 year over another year, as prices change, we have to standardize the value of a dollar. Just like we standardize the unit of length to 12 inches equals 1 foot. We got to standardize the value of a dollar. When we do this, it gives us the real value of a dollar. And this is what's important, guys. This is the real value of a dollar. And don't confuse that with the nominal value. Let's take an example. Okay, so we're going to make the value standard in 1 year. So we say 2016 as a standard. In 2016, $1, well, it's supposed to be 16, equals $1. Now, if prices go up by 10% from 2016 to 2022, then the real value goes down by 10%, because now it's going to take 10% more to buy the same thing as it did in 2016. So the nominal value of dollar is the price in current dollars. Okay, so the price in current dollars is not important. It's the real value. Let me give you another example here. We can see this when we look at the impact of inflation. One of the most important impacts of inflation is the loss of purchasing power. So inflation reduces the real value of your wages since you can buy less. Let's see how that's done. Let's say you make $30,000 and inflation is 5%. Well, what's really the real value of your income after that 5% inflation? Here's how we'd solve this. So the real income is equal to the nominal income minus the nominal income times the inflation rate. So let's plug in the numbers and solve this equation. The real income then would equal 30,000, which is what you're making, minus the 30,000 times the inflation rate. So the real income is $30,000 minus $1,500, or $2,800. This means you now only have $28,500 to buy what it cost $30,000 last year. You can buy less stuff. The value of what you're making has gone down. Now, it looks like you're making the same amount of money. You're still making $30,000, but it's only worth $28,500 because prices have gone up 5%. Now, to keep wages up with inflation, unions started negotiating what's called a cost of living adjustment, or a COLA, to keep things even. So let's look at how COLA works. COLAs increase your pay as inflation increases. Thus, if inflation is 7% and you make $50,000 a year, then a COLA would equal $3,500. So you would get $3,500 added on to this $50,000, and now your income is $53,500. So I know a lot of teachers get a COLA, and I know a lot of teachers that made $50,000, and then the next year they get a COLA of $3,500, and they say, "Oh, I got a raise." But did you really get a raise? No, because your real wage was constant. In other words, $53,000 this year is the same as $50,000 last year after 7% inflation. A COLA is not a raise. It's just keeping you even with what you made before. Now, it looks like you got a raise, but don't be fooled. You only got $50,000. You didn't get any change. Now, Social Security payments and many union contracts have built-in COLAs, but you still get the same amount. This is true of minimum wage too. If we look at minimum wage, it's been here, the minimum wage normal going here, but actually it's gone down as inflation has occurred to now the minimum wage has dropped to what it was previously. Okay, the second impact of inflation is gains by debtors and losses by creditors. If there's a 5% inflation, borrowers will be repaying loans with dollars that are 5% less valuable. This means that if inflation is expected, the lenders would build an inflation factor into the interest rate. But if it's unexpected, we have a big problem. The debtors, the people who borrowed money, are going to benefit by paying back in less valuable money, and the creditors are going to be losing. The third impact of inflation, and this is a big one for the overall economy, is increased uncertainty. Business hates uncertainty because risk increases. Remember, business is always done in the future. Businesses buy things now to sell later. But if prices change, you don't really know what the later is going to be. Inflation creates a lot of uncertainty because the value of a dollar will change. Uncertainty makes it difficult for businesses to plan. Now notice this, not all prices go up over time. TVs in the last decade have gone down 77.9%. Computers, 88% down. Cell phones have dropped. Shoes, toys, 44, almost 45%. Clothing and watches. Just an example, not all prices go up. A lot of prices go down. Let's take a look way back when. In the 1920s, a half gallon of milk cost 33 cents back in 1920. Well, if we take that now, remember we had to standardize the unit. So we make that 33 in real dollars, and we're looking at it would cost about $4.25 today, which is a little bit more than our price, current average, about $4. So milk hasn't changed that much over almost 100 years. Eating out. Well, today, if you go to Chili's or somewhere, it's going to cost you $20 or $30 for a meal for two eating out. And the same meal will cost 70 cents in 1920. Maybe about the same today, about $18 in today's dollars. A washing machine in the 1920s would cost about $81.15, or about $1,054. It's about the same. You go out for a fancy washing machine today. A new car cost 1920s about $525, which is about $6,709. Now that's a difference. But if we look at washing machines today and cars today, there have been tremendous increase in quality. since the 1920s. So you're getting a much better value today once these changes are figured into the equation. So the quality has risen. I mean, our washing machines today are a lot better than this old style here. And our cars, forget it. Those cars would need to be rebuilt after 30,000 miles. Now, what would cause, by the way, this is off the subject a little bit, what would cause the price to go down? Well, the price would go down when the supply curve goes to the right, causing a decrease in price and an increase in quantity. So here now, it's the opposite. The curve goes to the right. And this is an increase in supply causing economic growth, which is one of the goals of economics. Well, we're going to summarize, by the way, all the 4 different situations that can occur in an economy in one of the later units. But this is important now. I just want to throw out right now. Okay. Let's take some more prices. Look at 1970 prices in 2014. Everything's gone up on this list. Okay, houses really went up, it looks like. But notice thing now, not all prices went up the same rate. And the key is relative prices. The price of a good compared to another. So sellers use relative prices to move resources from one product or service to another. So what sellers do is to watch these prices and see which one's changing more. They take resources where they can out of one thing and go to another in order to make a bigger profit. Let's take, for example, what's happened to gasoline stations in the last 4 years. Well, way back when, there were gas stations here, and this is, look at this. Guys cleaning your windshield, they would check your oil, check the tire pressure, check the oil, and pump your gas. Full service. And there was a gas station on each corner of every busy intersection. You get the gas station, get a tune-up, get your tires changed, whatever you want. You could even get your car engine overhauled. Now, let's look at today. This is inside a gas station today. You have to pump your own gas, and then you got to come inside, many cases, and pay for it if you don't pay at the pump. What's changed? Why did they change? Well, remember that not all prices rise at the same rate. And gas prices rose less compared to prices for fast food and other items. So station owners figured out they could make more profit by selling fast food than by selling gas and providing services. So they switched their resources to opening bigger insides and start stocking food and ice cream and sodas and beer. I don't know why they sell beer in those things. You can't, you're not supposed to drive and drink, but anyway. Sellers are always on the move resources to goods and services that have higher relative prices. And in a free market, prices act like signals that tell sellers where to move resources. But with inflation, it clouds the signals. That's why it's harmful to the overall economy. Businesses cannot make good decisions where to move those resources. In a free market, the signaling is why markets are more efficient than when government controls prices. Okay, to wind this up, I want you to watch this video on the CPI and then review this overall lectures and answer the assignment questions in Canvas. Okay, thank you, and email me if you have any questions.